democracy, I mean, the term itself is demos kratos, rule by the people. Usually ancient Greece, ancient Athens is held out as a kind of example of true democracy. The problem with the ancient Athenian democracy was that the definition of a citizen excluded all women, children, and foreigners. And really, since ancient Athens, there has been no sort of true democracy. It's been more of an ideal.
Ask not what your country can do for you.
I am willing.
Ask not what your country can do for you.
I am willing.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Ask what you can do for your country.
We must act and act now. We must act and act now.
I'd say it would have to do with people being able to speak, have themselves heard, and have their needs met.
I guess maximum participation in choices of things that are important to the quality of your life.
I'm quite happy with the classical definition, the original one, which means rule by the common people. A state of affairs that I don't think exists anywhere, but which continues to provide the sort of the hope and the dream of some meaningful existence for, I think, most people on the globe.
For me, democracy is a way of involving all the people in the decision making. It's a way of having lots of people involved in working for their community. It would be meaning that there's a political system that allows people to be involved, and that the decisions aren't just made by a few people or by a king or by some kind of a hierarchy.
If I had to capsulize what democracy means, again from the municipal perspective, I would say it means involving and participation from as many people as possible in the decision-making process.
Well, democracy is some system, some means whereby the broadest spectrum of the population can take part in the decision-making process. And that's a very broad description. It's how you do it that can create problems or not.
To me, democracy should encompass, I guess, three things that are referred to in the slogan of the French Revolution. Liberty, liberté, égalité, et fraternité. Okay, so freedom, equality, and fraternity.
Well, what it's supposed to be is the freedom of right to vote and have a say in what your country or your government is doing.
Democracy is something that defines a society where everyone has a say in who the rulers are.
I think the best way to define democracy is using the Lincolnian definition, whereby government by the people, for the people, of the people.
I think that there's no real simple answer to what does democracy mean. I think it can mean different things to different people, but the two components that come to my mind are the systematic component of democracy, where we live in a society where the decision makers in our society are duly elected representatives of the people at the municipal level, the provincial level, the federal level, and then we also, of course, have our education system.
Well, democracy to me means everybody has a say in the decisions that affect them. So, I don't think we have much of that. Even though we have a seeming electoral democracy, everybody gets a vote, no matter what your sex or your religion or whatever. In practice, you really don't have much of a say about the most important decisions that affect your lives. So,
we have in the last, since 1789, the French Revolution, we have widened the number of people who actually have a say, a formal say, in selecting their political leaders. But we seem to have lost sight of, I think, as I said before, the larger vision of democracy. It's been out there, but it's usually been advocated by sort of radical non-mainstream thinkers like Karl Marx, for instance, right? Who wanted sort of more people involved on a daily basis, or Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who thought that a true democracy, you have active involvement and civic awareness on the part of the whole community, and without that, it can't really be a real democracy. What you get is elitism of one form or another, and our concern today with our preoccupation with the rules of democratic voting sort of masks what are the larger, more fundamental requirements for a true democracy. I think I read a quote from a novelist that voting today is really nothing but a fig leaf for elitism, right? It gives us the illusion that we have a democracy, but it doesn't really exist. We are a profoundly elitist society, and getting more so, I think, all the time.
I don't mean necessarily that all decisions are made by all of the people all of the time, because I think that becomes an impractical way of governing. And I believe there are methods of getting the community's involvement, participation, their views, taking them into consideration during the process of coming to conclusions. And I think in Ontario, not only in our own community here, perhaps across Canada, the planning process that is in place for municipalities is probably the best evidence that we have of that process working.
It's a good theory. I think it's right now we have the best of it. It's still in its earlier forms. You don't know what it could be.
I really think democracy, apart from the ancient Athenian experiment, is a recent, in historical terms, invention, dating back to the 1600s, 1700s, and that we've really been sort of trying to implement that ideal in the last 250, 300 years.
It's a long way from something that I would regard as a meaningful form of democracy, in which there is true liberty and true equality, where the value of each human being is realized politically, not in terms of some set of representatives who, once they take part in the parliament, can more or less forget who they represent. I don't see that anything about the kind of society that we live in demands that it be politically organized in a form where a very few people get to say what happens.
Well, we have a democratic ideal, but democracy is imperfect, just like everything else that we live and work with is imperfect. So the fact that many people don't participate or choose not to participate in the democracy or choose not to participate in their community means the democracy doesn't function as well as it could.
I think a lot of people are still uneducated and are left out of the voting system, and there's a lack of interest also.
And I think the fact is that in North America today, we have tended to get away from the deeper meaning of democracy. And so I'm sort of a bit pessimistic about where we are right now. What I see as a political scientist is sort of massive disinterest or lack of interest in politics by huge portions of society. Politics is treated by the media increasingly as a kind of spectator sport. It's trivialized in certain respects, and I think that leads to high degrees of frustration and anger on the part of a lot of citizens.
Are you going to vote? Why not?
Won't support it.
How come?
It's all bullshit.
Why do you say that?
It's bullshit.
What part of it's bullshit?
What part of it isn't bullshit, honestly?
Yeah.
We're getting screwed over every day.
I think we're in a fortunate position in this country. I think we have a good country. I wouldn't like to live anywhere else. I come from Northern Ireland. There was trouble there, and I have found that I'm happier in Canada. I think it is a very
Nigeria was thrown out of the UN because they didn't have a democracy, and now they have a democracy, and so they're allowed back into the way the world works.
You could say that the history provides an account of a kind of long struggle towards some semblance of that vision, constantly being set back by those who hold power.
Democracy also has to have some leveling of power for people, so that people who are lower income or people who are workers have a significant amount of power, just like people who are rich or wealthy or have social prestige would have a lot of power.
Democracy is good for the people, but there is class distinction. There is more favoritism towards the rich.
And that's one of the challenges of democracy, to get everybody to participate and also to have a sense of power, so that everybody can be a part of the whole decision making and can feel like they have some input into the way decisions are made. Not that my voice is the voice that predominates, but at least my voice is heard, and I have some say in how decisions are made in the community.
Well, I think it starts with legislation. I mean, you can look at the municipal elections, for example. Municipal elections, at best, if you have a mayoralty race, you're going to look at a 30% voter turnout. If you went to telephone balloting system, would that increase? I think so, if people were able to vote on the telephone. If you were able to have mail-in ballots, would that? I think so. I mean, you have to. It's like it's not unlike marketing. I mean, people have extremely busy lives, and if you have a product and the product may be an election, what do you do to encourage people to participate?
Well, the vote doesn't really work. You know what I mean? Because you vote for a party and they come in and they say that they're going to do something, but they don't. You know what I mean? So getting more people to vote, I don't know if that would even help.
They don't, it doesn't reach out to everybody. I don't know.
Do you see that changing, or is there a way that could, or is it important that it happens, or?
I think education in general, like making everyone aware of who is running for what and that sort of thing, who's up for voting.
Do you know about the upcoming municipal elections?
No.
Toronto or Kitchener?
No, I don't.
Do you know who's running?
No.
Will you vote?
Probably not.
Have a great deal of affection for a theory that says let's get rid of elections altogether and move to a lottery system, much like the grand jury has chosen. And that would give us then, in our representative bodies, a true cross-section of the community. Because unless you have a cross-section of the community in the representative bodies, all the voices aren't being heard. And that is the essence of democracy, that the voices be heard. They're not always adhered to, because the voices conflict. And so you can never please everyone, but the voices should be heard in the decision-making process, and I think that's a key component of democracy. The electoral system that we have doesn't allow for that. Elections are extremely expensive, they are time-consuming. There are some people in our society that do not have the resources to become part of the decision-making process. That doesn't mean that they could not make decisions just as well or perhaps better than the people that we do elect.
We need problem solvers. Problem solvers should be brought from outside, and this is what at the moment every level of government denies the right to do that.
In Ontario, under certain circumstances, we are able to have a referendum on a particular issue. I personally don't agree with referendum, the use of referendum, because I'm not sure that we have the capacity yet to make sure that the public has as much knowledge as possible to make an informed decision. And I think it simply, some issues end up being so complex that you have to have a history related to the issue, not just given the facts of the issue within a short time frame in order to come to conclusions. I don't think that's the lack of referendum. I don't think is defeating democracy.
Referendums can be useful in some cases, but government by referendum is very dangerous. Lyndon Johnson tried to govern by opinion polls and it didn't work. The problems come with referendums in that democracy cannot be just about the will of the majority. Permanent minorities, which sometimes exist, have to also be considered.
I think to have a true democracy, you have to have this belief, a strong belief on the part of most citizens that everyone is of equal worth. And I think working against that in contemporary society is the huge disparity of wealth in our society, and unequal wealth in North America today translates into unequal power. And I think that these inequalities are growing in the dot-com world, right? The people who are getting rich are getting richer faster, and the people who are sort of losing out in the scramble for wealth are being marginalized more quickly. And the gap is growing, it seems to me, between those two.
Because we're talking here in the year 2000, it's a little different because we've had a good economic swing and an upswing. The question is obviously how long can that last, be sustainable. But in many other countries that perhaps isn't the case. The economic churn isn't there, and that puts a little different perspective then on democracy. Democracy probably works well when there are as few people as possible who are suffering.
And I think that, again, to go back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he argued that you don't need perfect equality in a society because it's actually unattainable. But you do need a situation where inequalities are not so great that they cause political problems. And I think we've reached the stage in North America when Bill Gates is worth $48 billion, and ball players and hockey players routinely make millions of dollars, and entertainers like Tom Cruise make $20 million per movie. That the gap between those who have and those who don't is causing political problems, and I think those problems are probably going to get more intense in the next little while. And what that means is that I think in North America today that we seem to have lost this kind of the other aspect of democracy, a feeling of solidarity. It's still there in pockets, church groups and sort of non-traditional movements, community organizations. Sort of outside of the traditional realm of politics, you do find these groups and people who do seem to have a high degree of concern and for others and sense of solidarity. But our political system doesn't seem to translate that at all. And our larger society, all of our economy is based on, again, the fend for yourself, right? To the fast go the spoils.
Oh, certainly a degree of material comfort is a great obstacle to democracy. There's no question. That's a sort of paradox because in a way, I'm not speaking against material comfort. I mean, I value it as much as anybody, and having a kind of a life where you don't have to worry about food and you're not afraid of the police coming through the door is an achievement that I'm glad to be a part of. But it seems to me it's been bought at the expense of the people of Haiti and the rest of the world have been robbed in order that we here in the affluent states can have the kind of life we have. So there's no satisfaction that I think in fact there's no decency in being comfortable in one's comfort. I think if one has any kind of conscience at all, it's impossible to be comfortable.
We have an opportunity every few years to elect new people to rule the roost, but increasingly even those people don't have much control over the real decisions that affect society. They're increasingly pressured by the moneyed interests in our society, corporations and individuals, to do what they want.
You know, one of the most powerful institutions in this country is the Business Council on National Issues, which most people have never heard of. The BCNI, which is a body that represents the 150-odd richest corporations in the country, the vice chair of which is the chancellor of this university, the president and CEO of the Royal Bank, John Cleghorn. If you look at what that organization does, it represents the interests of the major corporations. And it does that in a systematic way by producing policy papers that it then directs to government. So if you look at the policy papers that the BCNI has produced over the last 20 years, and then you look at the policies that have been introduced by federal governments, you see that they follow what the BCNI has proposed. So those with the real power, those corporations, are able to get their views heard by the people that count in terms of the way that our society is run, and it comes out that way, where the interests of the ordinary person are not in the least their interests.
I think I've gotten a stronger and stronger understanding of international agreements and international governance that is controlling what we do here now. For example, you know, the World Trade Organization or the North American Free Trade Agreement, and how signing those has seriously restricted what we can do as Canadian citizens.
And the question will be when everybody realizes the public good needs to be protected, and also when people decide that, even the very wealthy decide that they're susceptible to the air, the water, the land, the social safety net just as much as the average and the poor people are, and that they need this in their community as much as anybody else does. So when's that going to happen, and how is that going to happen? And I'm not sure it can be planned. I think no one planned Walkerton. It happened, but it raises a lot of questions in a lot of people's minds, and I think there's all kinds of Walkertons ready to happen, especially when we've not protected the public good.
Things like labor laws, things like social programs, things like the environment that must be. We know that much of our environmental problem arrives across our border, whether we like it or not. It doesn't stop at Canada Customs. It just floats up here in the air, and it pollutes our waters, particularly because we are an Arctic country. But again, it's where you make the decisions. If democracy is about having a voice in the decisions, and the decisions are made on a global level, then the decisions, the voice has to be there somehow at the global level. However we choose to implement that, the voice has to be there, or we simply make democracy a quaint little custom in our country, and we trot out every few years, and we make our little X, and we feel so good about ourselves.
In Canada, whether it's because of our closeness to the United States, I'm not sure. I think that's part of it. There's simply this amazing complacency. Our political parties are motivated almost exclusively by a concern for winning office. There isn't a lot in the way of real ideas that make it to the public scene. Of course, there are very intelligent, very committed Democrats within each political party, but the overall concern with winning an election drowns out their influence in party politics. And so in Canada, we seem to have really fumbled the ball here in terms of engaging in a public debate about reforming our political institutions. And that's, I think, depressing as we enter the new millennium.
I believe, of the three orders of government that we have in our country, being the municipal, provincial, and federal, The municipal one is, first of all, closest to the people and easily accessible, and therefore becomes the most transparent.
I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, and I believe that He is a Prince of Peace, and that there will never be complete peace until He comes back to the earth. And I believe that He is coming very soon, because Bible prophecy is coming true every day.
I think there are remarkable signs of hope all over the world.
I think it sort of needs to be something led by example, you know, where people start implementing economic and political democracy on a really small scale and leading by example. Things like cooperatives, for example, I think are models of that.
No, the ancient style of true direct democracy where every citizen has a say in selecting the leaders, and where everyone actually does, at some point in his or her life, serve as a leader. I don't think that system's possible anymore. And I don't think that virtual democracy or teledemocracy will be as promising as some of its advocates think it is. But I do think that there are mechanisms that we can use, electoral reform, greater use of referenda, and some kind of citizen initiative that would place restraints on governing parties, and I think that's absolutely necessary.
Because you know, our sense of ardent individualism is Western. It's in particularly American in nature. I mean, there is a place for communal values as well, and for communal rights and rights as a group.
I think it's going to take a lot of different things. You know, I have a vision for what society could look like eventually, but in terms of how to get there from here, there's no plan. Nor do I think there should be one. I think the exciting thing is the heterogeneity of our society, and that different people in different neighborhoods are going to come up with different ways of getting there and with different visions. And I think that's the hopeful thing about humanity, is that we could have so many different futures.
It's about not treating other human beings as means to one's own ends. Human beings are always ends. They're never means.
There is nothing more democratic than calling an election.
Democracy.
There is nothing more democratic.
Just worries the hell out of me.
It is an opportunity for Canadians to choose between different visions and different values.
Ask not what your country can do for you.
I am willing.
Ask not what your country can do for you.
I am willing.
Ask not what your country can do for you. And what you can do for your country. And what you can do for your country.
We must act and act now. We must act and act now. We must act and act now.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
Act and act now. We must act and act now. We must act and act now. We must act and act now.
That all men are created